According to myth, the Nemean lion was a huge and fearsome beast that terrorized the Nemean region between the cities of Corinth and Argos. The lion was invulnerable to all weapons, and its hide was so thick that even arrows could not penetrate it. The king of Corinth, Eurystheus, commissioned Hercules to kill the Nemean lion as the first of 12 feats. Hercules traveled to Nemea and found the lion in its den. Hercules shot the lion with his bow and threw spears at it, but they could not pierce its hide. Then Hercules decided to fight the lion hand to hand. Hercules pounced on the lion and strangled it with his bare hands. He squeezed the lion's neck so hard that it suffocated. Hercules then stripped the lion of its invulnerable skin and put it on himself as armor. The skin of the Nemean lion became a symbol of Hercules' strength and invulnerability, and he wore it on himself in all his subsequent feats. According to myth, the Lernaean Hydra was a terrible monster that lived in the swamps of Lernae. The Hydra was a huge serpent, but had many heads and one of them was immortal. The Hydra also had poisonous fangs and its breath was so poisonous that even the air around it was life-threatening. The king of Corinth, Eurystheus, commissioned Hercules to kill the Lernaean Hydra as the second of 12 feats. Hercules traveled to Lernaeus and found the Hydra in its lair. Hercules pounced on the Hydra and began chopping off its heads, but each severed head grew back, and the Hydra grew even stronger. Then Hercules asked his nephew Iolaus for help. Iolaus set fire to a nearby forest, and Hercules used the burning branches to burn the Hydra's necks after cutting off the heads so they couldn't grow back. When Hercules had cut off all the Hydra heads except the immortal one, he asked the goddess Athena for help. Athena advised Hercules to bury the immortal Hydra head under a large rock and to pour poisonous herbs into its blood so that it could do no more harm. The Carinaean doe was a deer with golden antlers and bronze hooves that was dedicated to the goddess Artemis. The doe lived in the forests of Carinaea, located in the northwest of the Peloponnese. The doe was very fast and agile, and no one could catch her. The king of Corinth, Eurystheus, commissioned Hercules to catch the Carinaean doe as the third of his 12 feats. Hercules traveled to Carinaea and pursued the doe for a year. He pursued it through mountains, rivers, and forests, but the doe always eluded him. Finally, Hercules caught up with the doe on Mount Artemision, where it had stopped to rest. Hercules shot the doe with his bow, but the arrow missed it, so Hercules rushed after the doe and chased it for another day. Finally, Hercules caught up with the doe and grabbed it with his bare hands. Hercules brought the doe to Eurystheus, but he decided to dedicate it to the goddess Artemis. Hercules took the doe to Artemis, and she was so impressed by Hercules' courage and perseverance that she allowed him to keep the doe as a trophy. The Erymanthean lynx was a huge and fearsome lynx that terrorized the district of Erymanthus, located in the west of the Peloponnese, so large that its fangs were longer than a spear, and it was so strong that it could easily destroy any obstacle. The king of Corinth, Eurystheus, commissioned Hercules to capture the Erymanthean boar as the fourth of his 12 feats. Hercules traveled to Erymanthus and pursued the boar through the mountains and forests. The boar was very fast and agile, and Hercules had to chase it for a whole day. Finally, Hercules caught up with the boar on Mount Erymanthus and captured it with his bare hands. Hercules tied the boar to a tree and carried it to Eurystheus. Eurystheus was so frightened by the boar that he hid behind the walls of his palace and ordered Hercules to take the boar to King Eurystheus, who was a friend of Eurystheus. Hercules took the boar to Eurystheus, but he refused to accept it because he was afraid that the boar would destroy his kingdom. So Hercules killed the boar and took its skin to Eurystheus as proof that the feat had been accomplished. Aegeus was king of Ellida, located in the west of the Peloponnese. Aegeus had a huge herd of cattle, and his stables had not been cleaned for 30 years. The stables were so filthy that rats and other rodents lived there and various diseases breed there. The king of Corinth, Eurystheus, commissioned Hercules to clean out the stables of Aegeus as the fifth of his 12 feats. Hercules went to Aegeus and asked his permission to clean the stables. Aegeus agreed, but put a condition that Hercules must clean the stables in one day. Hercules agreed to the condition and came up with a cunning plan. He moved the beds of two rivers, the Alpheus and the Peneus, so that they flowed through the stables. The water of the rivers washed all the dirt and filth out of the stables, and they were cleaned in one day. Aegeus was so impressed with Hercules' wisdom and cunning, but refused to pay him for the work. citing that Hercules had not fulfilled the conditions because he had not cleaned the stables with his own hands. Hercules was angry and vowed to take revenge on Abgeus. The Stymphalian birds were a flock of birds of prey that lived in the forest of Stymphalia. The birds had iron beaks and claws and poisonous feathers. They fed on people and animals, and their cry was so loud that it could cause panic and terror. King Eurystheus commissioned Hercules to kill the Stymphalian birds as the sixth of 12 feats. Hercules traveled to Stymphalia and found that the birds lived in a forest surrounded by swamps and lakes. Hercules could not get close to the birds because they were very fast and agile. Then Hercules came up with a cunning plan. He made special brass rattles that made a loud sound when shaken. Hercules began to shake the rattles, and the birds, frightened by the loud sound, flew into the air. Hercules started shooting at them with his bow, and many of the birds were killed. The rest of the birds flew to the island of Ares, located in the Black Sea. Hercules went there and continued his pursuit of the birds. He killed almost all the birds except a few that flew to the island of Aretusa, located in the Mediterranean Sea. Hercules could not reach the island, and the birds remained there forever. To fulfill Eurystheus' seventh assignment, Hercules had to leave Greece and go to the island of Crete. Eurystheus instructed him to bring a Cretan bull to Mycenae. This bull was sent to Minos, king of Crete, by Poseidon. The shaker of the earth Minos was to sacrifice the bull to Poseidon, but Minos was sorry to sacrifice such a beautiful bull. He left him in his herd and sacrificed one of his bulls to Poseidon. Poseidon was angry with Minos and sent the bull out of the sea into a frenzy. The bull ran all over the island and destroyed everything in its path. The great hero Hercules caught the bull and tamed it. He sat on the bull's broad back and sailed it across the sea from Crete to the Peloponnese. Hercules brought the bull to Mycenae, but Eurystheus was afraid to leave Poseidon's bull in his herd and let him go free. Feeling free again, the mad bull ran across the whole Peloponnese to the north and finally ran to Attica on the Marathon field. There he was killed by the great Athenian hero Theseus. According to myth, Diomedes was a Thracian king who lived in northeastern Greece. Diomedes had a herd of carnivorous horses that fed on humans. The horses were so wild and aggressive that no one could tame them. King Eurystheus commissioned Hercules to steal Diomedes' horses as the eighth of 12 feats. Hercules went to Diomedes and asked his permission to take the horses. Diomedes agreed, but put a condition that Hercules must tame the horses himself. Hercules agreed to the condition and came up with a cunning plan. He asked for help from his friend Abder, who was a very fast runner. Hercules and Abder approached the horses and began to run around them until the horses were tired. Hercules then pounced on the horses and tamed them. When Diomedes saw that Hercules had tamed the horses, he was so angry that he rushed at Hercules with his sword. Hercules killed Diomedes in self-defense and took the horses to King Eurystheus. Hippolyta was the queen of the Amazons, a female warrior tribe that lived in northeastern Greece. Hippolyta had a magic belt that was given to her by Ares, the god of war. The belt was a symbol of power and might, and no one could take it away. The king of Corinth, Eurystheus, instructed Hercules to obtain Hippolyta's belt as the ninth of 12 feats. Hercules went to the Amazons and asked them to give him the belt. The Amazons agreed, but put a condition that Hercules must fight their best female warrior. Hercules agreed to the condition and fought the best warrior of the Amazons. In a fierce battle, Hercules still defeated her and received the belt of Hippolyta. Hercules then took the belt to Eurystheus. Geryon was a giant who lived on the island of Erythea. Geryon had a huge herd of cattle that grazed on his island kingdom. The cattle were guarded by the two-headed dog Orpheus and the giant shepherd Eurytheon. The king of Corinth, Eurystheus, commissioned Hercules to steal Geryon's cattle as the 10th of 12 feats. Hercules traveled to the island of Erythea and found the cattle grazing in a field. Hercules killed Orpheus and Eurytheon and began to drive the cattle to his place. Geryon found out about the cattle theft and started chasing Hercules. Geryon was so big and strong that he could jump over rivers and mountains. Hercules shot at him with his bow, but Geryon was invulnerable to arrows. Then Hercules put on a magic cloak that made him invisible and attacked Geryon from behind. Hercules killed Geryon and continued to drive the cattle to his place. The Hesperides were nymphs who lived in a garden at the end of the world. In their garden grew golden apples, which were given by the earth goddess Gaia to the goddess Hera on her wedding day to Zeus, the sky god. The golden apples were a symbol of immortality and eternal youth, and they were guarded by the dragon Late. King Eurystheus instructed Hercules to obtain the golden apples of Hesperides as the 11th of 12 feats. Hercules went to the Hesperides and asked them to give him the golden apples. The Hesperides agreed, but put a condition that Hercules must first slay the dragon Late. Hercules agreed to the condition and fought Late. He managed to defeat the fearsome dragon and killed him. The Hesperides gave him the golden apples. Hercules then took the apples to Eurystheus. The underworld was the realm of the dead, where the souls of dead people went after death. The underworld was guarded by the fearsome three-headed dog Cerberus, who would not let the living into the realm of the dead or let the dead out of it. The king of Corinth, Eurystheus, commissioned Hercules to descend to the underworld and bring Cerberus to him as the 12th and last of his 12 feats. Hercules traveled to the underworld and went through many trials before reaching Cerberus. Hercules fought Cerberus and managed to overpower him. He tied Cerberus with a chain and brought him to Eurystheus. Eurystheus was so terrified of Cerberus that he ordered Hercules to carry him back to the underworld. Hercules returned Cerberus to the underworld and completed his 12th and final feat,